As if there isn't enough going on in Westminster this week, it all got a bit 007 when MI5 issued a rare warning about a Chinese agent who had infiltrated Parliament and was influencing current and aspiring MPs. It meant some awkward questions for Labour's Barry Gardiner and others, and left many MPs already concerned about China's activities calling for a harder line. Leading those calls this week was Iain Duncan Smith, and he was, of course, leader of the Conservative Party in the early 2000s, at a time when the party also trailed Labour in the polls. So he knows plenty about the challenges to the leadership. He joins me now live from his constituency. Good morning, Mr. Duncan Smith. If we can start with the parliamentary issue, MI5 had to issue an urgent alert because of the activities of the Chinese agent affecting our parliament. And that established a link between the Communist Party in China and current and aspiring members of parliament. Now, in another week, we'd be talking about nothing else pretty much. But even in this week, it's still pretty shocking, isn't it?
It is. And the reality for us is that I think successive governments have been completely asleep at the wheel over this issue, completely asleep at the wheel. And the reality, therefore, is that we need to figure out where we are with China, whether we have a relationship or whether they are seen as a threat. If you look back at the Foreign and Defence report, you will see that they categorize Russia as a threat, but China as a competitor. And it does then lead you to wonder why that was the case. And the answer is, I think, that China over the years has so dominated us in a way that we are now completely dependent on them for a whole series of items and articles. They've got themselves into the position of being able to invest into our nuclear industry. Most of the solar arrays, the elements on them, are produced by slave labor from Xinjiang. The insides of most of the wind turbines that we have are all made in China. We've become utterly dependent, and far too many officials and ex-ministers have then left and retired and gone and taken money from China. So the very fact that they are in trying to persuade and infiltrate and subvert people within our political system is nothing new at all. But the worst bit about it is that the government, too many governments, seem too cautious about calling it out. This is a brutal, dictatorial, ghastly regime, and we seem to want to, I think, kowtow to them too often, and that's dangerous, and you've seen the results of that. And this is just the tip of the iceberg, I can promise you.
I wonder if you could be clear about why this is such a big problem, because politicians take donations from all sorts of people, don't they? And part of that, undoubtedly, must be because those people want to influence those politicians. And, you know, we elect, we hope, independent-minded people who won't be swayed. Why is this particular issue such a big deal?
Well, number one, we're dealing with a regime which is committing genocide. We are dealing with a regime that has trashed a British, Sino-British international treaty on Hong Kong. We're dealing with a regime that is locking up peaceful democracy campaigners and threatening Taiwan. We also deal with a regime that has killed Indian soldiers on its border in disputes and has taken over the South China Seas and has threatened everybody and anybody, and is now subverting countries in Africa. You see the other day that if they don't pay their loans back, which they're given, I saw the other day, I think it was in Sri Lanka, they've taken over a port pretty much. I mean, this goes on. We are not dealing with a European regime or an American regime which is democratic and accountable. This is a brutal, disgusting regime. And what they're after is making sure there can be no criticism of them. So they can break every rule that they wish, and they do, and therefore we won't. And after all, let's just be reminded of one thing. You know, COVID-19, whether or not we believe it came from a laboratory or not, you know, the communist regime of China refused to let the world know of the scale of the problem they had until very late on, well over a month and a half before they told officially the WHO. By the way, the WHO themselves seem conflicted because they should have been asking direct questions, but they didn't. The result is that has spread around the world. So when you're dealing with a regime like this that doesn't tell the truth, that doesn't open up and is brutal, then this sort of thing, millions have died as a result of that. So we can't just treat the Chinese government as any other government. So when they start infiltrating, when they start subverting parliament, and when they start paying people off, we've got to be much, much, much more brutal about it. And Australia shows us the way to do this, which is to ban involvement with the Chinese authorities and China in critical circumstances.
Well, just very quickly, though, we've identified one individual, Christine Chin-Kui Lee. Do you believe that there are other people doing this?
Oh, absolutely, certainly. I think this is the tip of the iceberg. Let's just look at universities, for example. In plain sight, you've got the Confucius Institute, which offers to pay to help students understand China. In fact, what so much of it does is to spy on Chinese students. Many of our universities have become completely dependent on Chinese students. I was talking to one the other day that had allowed members of the embassy to come to one of their debates about China so that they could literally spy on who was saying what. I mean, this goes on everywhere. If you look at where their money goes, whether it's Huawei or anything else, it's all about subverting us and making sure that they can undercut the bid contracts, etc., and win contracts and win over the UK. So it's very important we recognize China as a threat, not as a competitor.
Right. Forgive me for interrupting you, but I want to move on to, of course, the issue of the day. And let me be absolutely straightforward in asking this question. Let's leave the technicalities and even the kind of small politics out of this. You've done the job. Do you think that Boris Johnson is morally fitted to remain as leader of the Conservative Party?
Well, one rule I always made for myself is not to enter the world of morals. And I'll leave that to those who practice and preach and deliver religion. And once politicians start lecturing about morals,
forgive me, you will have been talking to your constituents this weekend.
Completely different issue.
It would be hard to imagine that question is not being asked between them and to you.
Well, is it a morality question, or is it a question about whether or not these things should have happened? So let's remove the two and just deal with the reality. This is unforgivable. There is no question that what has been going on, and despite your previous interviewee, has unearthed a culture which has become lazy and slack about what happens after hours, what happens in offices. Most businesses wouldn't allow what was going on in the offices, even though people have been under pressure. This was in the middle of lockdown with oppressive rules about what people could and couldn't do. And there's no question my constituents, other constituents, are quite rightly very angry about the fact that many of them were having to obey what some of us felt were over-onerous rules, but nonetheless they were rules. And yet there seemed to be others doing things that they weren't able to do at the heart of government, or maybe across government too, in other departments. So the key thing here is this was wrong. There is no question for it. There's no explanations. There's just apology and contrition. And we have to see now what Sue Gray comes up with, to the extent of it, who was responsible and how this all worked.
All right, let me take the word moral or morality out of my question and put this to you again, because you've been there. Isn't this a matter of character? And isn't the danger here that the character of your leader is essentially defining the Conservative Party and potentially losing people like you with your not gigantic majority, your seat?
Well, as I said earlier on, this is not an issue about quibbling as to why or wherefore. This is about understanding that responsibility always in these issues comes to the heart of it all. And it's about the Prime Minister's authority and about his decision-making, and whether or not he knew or understood what was going on is a question that Sue Gray will settle. But there's no question right now that this is an appalling set of circumstances. It should not have happened. None of them should have happened. What I can't understand is why there wasn't a sign nailed up on every door of every government department, including Downing Street, that would have said simply, when you have finished your work, go home. go home, not stop
Right.
by. And that sort of level of understanding is beyond me, and I can't figure it out. So absolutely not. I mean, I'm as appalled as anybody else. I'm as appalled as my constituents. It's simply appalling one way or the other. But we have to see, finally, we called for this inquiry. Let us see what it comes up with, and then we will make our decision.
Forgive me. Thank you very much, Iain Duncan Smith. Thank you for your time this morning.
Pleasure.